Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Archbishop of Banterbury, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, here, once again, Rob-casting at you from the Robservatory, coming at you with Robservations, episode number 438. Excited to come to you on this day, another day. There's a lot of craziness happening in my hometown of Seattle. Antifa is occupying neighborhoods. They are advocating shooting at cops. They are making a list of demands about how they want basically the entire system dismantled. So I just hope that everyone in Seattle and people, friends of mine, my family is in Seattle, that everybody stays safe and that cool heads prevail in all of this. So there you go. We're dealing with a lot of crazy fallout across the country, and in a way, I think all of the discussion and everything that's happening can only be good. Open communications. I don't think open revolution is necessarily the best thing, but I do think communication and discussing these issues across the board is terrific. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was yesterday. I talked a little bit about Gone with the Wind being removed from HBO, or we talked about this morning, and I wanted to really get into this. And I first read about this and heard about it yesterday, but John and I talked about it on the show today. But one of my favorite people in the world is science fiction writer David Gerrold, who you all might know from, he obviously worked on the original Star Trek, he worked on Star Trek The Next Generation, but he's also a great novelist in his own right. And I've talked about his book series, The War Against the Tor. Let's see, do I have one over here? Yeah. Here's, it seems appropriate. I didn't even mean for this to happen, but this is the third book in the series, A Rage for Revenge. Even though he never finished the series, he's still working on it, but there's 4 books in the series, and it's one of the most compulsively rereadable things I've ever read in my life. And it is about, it is actually about Earth being invaded by an alien ecosystem that basically begins terraforming the planet out from underneath us. And the 4 books are so interesting and so compelling. They combine philosophy with horror and great science fiction. And they're the only series of books I think I've read all 4 of them 5 times. And every time I pick one up and start reading, I can't stop. But David Gerrold had a really interesting commentary that I would like to read to you about Gone with the Wind. And again, this is off of his Facebook page, and I really enjoyed it. HBO Max has dropped Gone with the Wind from its library. He wrote this before they made an announcement, which I'll get into. But HBO Max has dropped Gone with the Wind from its library. On the one hand, I can understand the reasoning. The film is as insensitive to black issues as D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Its loyalties are in the wrong place. In the same way, A Tale of Two Cities and The Scarlet Pimpernel treat the French aristocracy as victims of an ignorant mob. But Gone with the Wind is also an historical artifact. I'm a film buff, so I see it differently than those with more contemporary outlooks. If you're willing to submerge yourself in the story of Gone with the Wind, it's a marvelous movie. But you have to approach it as if it's a fantasy. To appreciate it, you have to realize that it's not about the Civil War, and it's not about the horrors of slavery. It's about a selfish, spoiled brat living in an idealized delusion and stalking an elegant schmuck who is too stupid to realize what's going on and too polite to tell her to F off. The bulk of the movie is about all the shit she has to deal with as her world collapses around her in an ill-considered slaveholders' rebellion before she finally realizes who she really loves, but by then, it's too late. She effed up. So structurally, it's about unrealized growth. She grows, but she still doesn't get the prize. The real prize, of course, is that she learns to be responsible for her circumstances, even though so many of her choices along the way are selfish and stupid and unforgivable. Gone with the Wind is actually a tawdry melodrama, an overblown soap opera, and if that was the sum total of it, we could dismiss it easily. But the film can also be seen as a metaphor for the delusional mindset of the entire South, a culture that wrapped itself in the fantasies of an idealized world that was false from the get-go, and then did stupid and ugly things to try and live in that self-righteous illusion. It is not, and never has been, a glorified picture of the South as much as it has been a fairly savage evisceration of the kind of people who thought they were being good while being stupid. There are really only 3 characters in the movie worth admiring. One is Rhett Butler, who loves the South, but not its delusions. Not too happy with his marital rape, however. The second is Mammy, who has both affection for Scarlett and enough common sense not to buy into the bullshit. The third is Belle Watling, the Madam, who has more integrity than almost anyone else combined. One could also say nice words about Melanie, who oozes goodness in every scene, but she's blinded herself to Scarlett's worst behaviors. Scarlett isn't worth admiring as much as she's worth pitying. But because this is a melodrama, in the end, we want her to be happy. Despite the squalid attempt at a sequel that never understood what the story was really about, we walk away from the film with the hopeful thought that perhaps eventually she does get Rhett back. In reality, if you think about it, that she is a selfish, spoiled brat, but now she's a selfish, spoiled brat, there's nothing there for Rhett to return to. And now that she's a successful, selfish, spoiled brat, there's nothing left for Rhett to return to. She probably ends up withered and alone. But that's not a story audiences of the time wanted to see. They wanted a hopeful ending. The picture was brilliantly assembled, despite a number of formidable challenges. It was the most glorious Technicolor epic ever made, and may hold on to that distinction forever. It was released in 1939, while the lights were going out all over Europe, so it was a brief moment of escape in a very troubled world. And of course, it had that magnificent Max Steiner score. But yes, it's insensitive to black issues. David O. Selznick did consult with various black leaders at the time, trying to be fair, and there were adjustments made to the script. A lot of the offensive dialogue was removed. But the film was never about the crimes of slaveholders as much as it was about life inside that bubble of delusion. And while the crimes of slavery were still fresh in the minds of many black people, there were many former slaves still alive when the movie was released. There was very little public awareness of slavery and Jim Crow among the white majority. Gone with the Wind existed for its audiences as a romanticized version of wealth and privilege, the kind of life they imagined, not the kind of life they were actually living in at the tail end of the Great Depression. The film ignores the realities of slaveholders, but from the get-go, it was always a soap opera, and that's truly the only way you can appreciate it. It's also about unrequited love, but it's about delusions, not just Scarlett's, but the whole South as well, in my humble opinion. I like that. I've seen Gone with the Wind a number of times. I've owned Gone with the Wind in various formats. I have it on Blu-ray. I think it is a spectacular achievement in filmmaking. Now, I've never read the Margaret Mitchell novel, but the way I always saw it, I've seen it as the fact that the South became, it was a place of horror. At least that's how I've always read it, because in the beginning of the film, it shows you, as David Gerald pointed out, that it's a delusion, and you have all of these well-heeled, wealthy white plantation owners and their sons and daughters showing up for a party, and they're excited about going to war with the North. They're excited about maintaining their economies, which were based on the slave trade, on the the trade of selling other human beings into bondage so they could make money from those human beings. And what you see as the Civil War breaks out is what ends up happening to that way of life. I mean, It's literally, in the famous burning of Atlanta sequence, burned to the ground. The revolution has come. And there's that amazing shot where the camera lifts off and pans across where the trains are, and you see these formerly well-heeled Southern gentlemen all eviscerated and destroyed after being on various battlefields. And the human carnage is shocking. And I've always seen the film as, again, as a cautionary tale. And a lot of people think it glorifies the antebellum South. I've always seen it as it's about how that way of life was torn asunder. Now, I don't know, again, how Margaret Mitchell portrayed it, but I think that the filmmakers who made Gone with the Wind were keenly aware of what was really happening, and they took one of the biggest selling novels at the time, and they made one of the great films ever made, and you can choose to see it in however you want to see it. What does it mean to you? Now, I think it is problematic now. And I think it does portray certain things in the wrong way. Now, I would like to point out that we talked about this, that Hetty McDaniel, who plays Mammy in the movie, would have been 125 years old today. And she was the first black actor to ever win an Oscar at the Academy Awards. As we pointed out this morning, when the Academy Awards were held in 1940 for the movies of 1939, the venue wouldn't even allow blacks into it. So Hetty McDaniel could not sit with her own co-stars. She had starred in this movie that was being honored, and she couldn't even sit with her own fellow actors. She went to the award show, and she made a beautiful, heartfelt presentation, becoming the first black actor to ever win at the Academy Awards. You can actually see that on YouTube. You can see her speech on YouTube. So like everything, evolution is not always perfect. It is multidimensional, and it is difficult, and it is problematic. On one hand, you have the first black actor winning an Academy Award, but the Academy had their award show in a venue that wouldn't even let black people in at all. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? How do we handle something like this? Now, at first, I was under the impression that HBO was pulling Gone with the Wind permanently, and that turned out not to be the case. So I wanted to read, actually, so in case anyone hasn't heard this, this is an article that was on Deadline this morning. Actually, it was on yesterday. Tom Tapp wrote this article at 8:45 last night. HBO Max removes Gone with the Wind from the streaming platform, says film will return with a discussion of its historical context, whatever that means. Less than 2 weeks after launch, HBO Max has removed Gone with the Wind from its streaming offering. It's a significant move given the film's popularity and status as the highest-grossing movie of all time when box office numbers are adjusted for inflation. From an HBO Max spokesperson, Gone with the Wind is a product of its time and depicts some of the ethnic and racial prejudices that have, unfortunately, been commonplace in American society. These racist depictions were wrong then, and they're wrong today. And we felt that to keep this title up without an explanation and a denouncement of those depictions would be irresponsible. These depictions are certainly counter to Warner Media's values, so when we return the film to HBO Max, it will return with a discussion of its historical context and a denouncement of those very depictions, but will be presented as it was originally created, because to do so otherwise would be the same as claiming that these prejudices never existed. If we are to create a more just, equitable, and inclusive future, we must first acknowledge and understand our history. I actually thought that was a great statement, actually. I believe in that 100%. On Monday, Academy Award-winning writer-director John Ridley, 12 Years a Slave, called for the film's removal from HBO Max, saying, "It doesn't just fall short with regard to representation. It is a film that glorifies the antebellum South. It is a film that, when it is not ignoring the horrors of slavery, pauses only to perpetuate some of the most painful stereotypes of people of color." Indeed, the 1939 film is not aging well in an era of protests against police brutality and social injustice. The Southern-set Civil War epic portrays slaves as mostly happy with their lot and loyal to their owners to the end. It also plays down, if not eliminates altogether, the horrors of slavery, even as it romanticizes the suffering of the suffering of Vivian Lee's Scarlett O'Hara before, during, and after the Civil War. Continued Ridley, it is a film that, as part of the narrative of the Lost Cause, romanticizes the Confederacy in a way that continues to give legitimacy to the notion that the secessionist movement was something more, or better, or more noble than what it was. A bloody insurrection used to maintain the right to own, sell, and buy human beings. Gone with the Wind won 8 competitive Oscars, including the first Oscar ever awarded to a black person. That statue went to Hattie McDaniel for her role as the ever-loyal house slave Mammy. It was also awarded Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress in a Leading Role, Best Writing, Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Color, Best Film Editing, and Best Art Direction. AFI ranked Gone with the Wind as the 4th best film ever made on its 100 best movies of all time. The removal comes on the same day that Deadline confirmed Paramount Network had pulled Cops. The show was pulled last week in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. The series will not be coming back. First of all, I love John Ridley. He's written science fiction even. And I am a huge fan of his, and I think his words carry a lot of weight. And everything he said about Gone with the Wind was true. But I would say this. What I think is most important, and I think what HBO is doing, is absolutely right. You have people like John Ridley come on and speak about the movie. I don't know if he would, because he has said that he believes it should be taken off the platform altogether. I think that we must keep hearing all of these stories, and we have to know where we came from and where we are going, because we need to understand where we've been. We really do. And I really believe that, and I think that it's wrong to try and erase a past because it was, in fact, problematic, because it did happen. We can't pretend it didn't happen. Now, as many people know, I was raised Jewish, and every year in Sunday school, I met actual Holocaust survivors who would come speak to my classes, whether it was on Sunday mornings or on Tuesday nights. There was one point when I had to go twice a week. And obviously, things like the Shoah Foundation has made sure that what happened during the Holocaust is something that was preserved for posterity. And I know for a fact that there are people, as the years go by, and there's no one left who is actually experiencing that horror. And it wasn't just Jews that were killed. Remember, there was many other groups of people that were targeted. There was 6 million Jews killed, but there was also another 6 million different kinds of people, and those were people only killed in concentration camps. Let's not talk about what happened in Russia. It was a time of true madness when the world was falling apart. But I do think it's very important to contextualize these things and preserve them. Otherwise, we will not understand the horrors of where we come from and what we were capable of doing to one another. As a matter of fact, I don't think maybe HBO should couple Gone with the Wind with Mr. Ridley's film 12 Years a Slave, because that 12 Years a Slave, I think, is a terrific movie. I think about it a lot. And it was horrific to watch, but it also really got its point across. Remember, we enslaved people for hundreds of years here in this country, certainly before even America was America. It wasn't a passing thing that happened for a couple of decades. Centuries. And it's important, I think, to preserve those things. We cannot forget. Oh no. Great. Oh no, I thought I'd lost all you, but I didn't. And I think that's we must preserve our history, all of our history, and we have to teach it, and that requires well-funded educational programs. That requires great public schooling for all. That requires teachers. And, we really need to have, if anything, I've often called for the one thing that we should start couching as in a national security blanket is the fact that the United States we must have well-funded public education for all, and we have to have great health care. It is most important that we have an educated and healthy population. If we don't, what's our society supposed to be about? What are we doing? And I've always believed in that. I got a lot of letters today. By the way, on a personal note, there's a letter that I'm not going to read, but I have been receiving letters that have crossed over into the personally threatening. Literally, me and my family have been threatened with severe violence and bodily injury. And I would just like to point out that those emails are being dealt with correctly. So, anyway, let's see where I am now. I don't know what's going on here, but I think the landscapers might be here. They always come when I'm on, which is sort of strange. But anyway, letters, ladies and gentlemen. I've got letters. I'm going to bring those letters to you right now. Joseph Anthony writes in. Hi, Rob. My name is Joseph Anthony. I'm half white and black, and I stand by you no matter what. You've inspired me to become a YouTuber, going to be one, and I'm going to be one. And I'd love to hear your advice how to get started, and I'd love to have you on the show once I kick it off. Thanks again. Just keep your head up. I'd love to know what you think of the Snyder Cut. And if it's successful, will it open the Pandora's box for Ben Affleck to return for HBO Max after the Snyder Cut? Well, first of all, Joseph, the one thing that makes me the most happy about this channel is when people write in and they say that they were either inspired to pick up a movie I mentioned or they were inspired to do something on their own, any kind of creative work. So I would say, first of all, it's all you have to do. You have to have a camera and you have to have a microphone. Sometimes they're already built into your computer, and you have to have yourself. And I would encourage, if you want to do that, please start your own YouTube channel. And I will tell you right now, I would be happy to come on whenever you want. As many people know, when people ask me to come on their channels, I usually say yes, obviously time permitting, because otherwise, if we're not here to inspire one another, why are we here? So, absolutely. Now, as regards to the Snyder Cut, I can't wait to see the Snyder Cut, especially if I think it's as very different as it's probably very, very different than what we ended up getting. I would imagine it would be. I really want to see it. I hope it's successful. However, Warner Brothers has invested a great deal of money in Matt Reeves and his new Batman, so I don't imagine that we're going to see more of Ben Affleck as Batman beyond the Snyder Cut, as much as I would like to, because I really enjoyed his portrayal of Batman. So, yeah. This one comes from Craig Stratton. Greetings, Rob. Today, I write to you because I want to discuss remakes, and I pose this question. Does a superior remake do more damage to the original movie than an inferior remake? Ooh, that's a good question. I ask this because of a trend I've noticed. When a great film gets a bad remake, after time, the remake gets forgotten, but the original is still loved and remembered. I mean, who if I say Total Recall, the first thing that pops in your head isn't the Arnold Schwarzenegger version? It's certainly not the Colin Farrell remake, even though the remake is more recent, as it is soon forgotten while the original is remembered. However, if I were to say The Fly, isn't your first thought the remake starring Jeff Goldblum from 1986 and not the 1958 Vincent Price movie? Well, to be honest, you're right about that. Yes. This time, the remake is remembered whilst the original is forgotten, simply because the remake is a great movie. I would also add that The Thing, most people I think would think about John Carpenter's The Thing. Then we have the prequel that was made afterwards, And then we have of course, the original remake with James Arness as the creature. I ask this because I notice a lot of film fans seemingly having this irrational hatred of remakes because they think the remake will be bad and that somehow damages the original in some way. Yet a bad remake is deemed to be forgotten while the original is loved. Because in reality, the biggest threat an original movie can have is a superior remake. I mean, who here in the Post-Geek Singularity has seen or even heard of Scarface, Ocean's 11, or Little Shop of Horrors? The originals, that is. Well, okay, I'd like to say two things about that. I think you're making very compelling points, Craig, and I want to thank you for writing in about this. What an interesting topic. Here's the thing. I want to go back to my assertion that most pop culture has a shelf life of 20 years. Now, that's not to say things don't last longer than 20 years, but in 20 years, people tend to forget, or things fall by the wayside. Now, as you point out, the original The Fly was a 1958 Vincent Price movie. Now, if you take my adage and say, okay, in 20 years, you're looking at 1978. Well, John Carpenter's remake David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly came out in 1986. So it was 28 years later, The Fly came out. Well, because of generations and because of the age of people, there weren't very many people, especially the film-going audience, especially in the movie pundit space, or people that are reading Fangoria and Starlog, that saw The Fly. They might have seen it on TV, but it didn't have the resonance for them. You had a whole new group, a whole new crop of moviegoers that hadn't seen The Fly in a theater because the movie was 28 years old. So when Cronenberg's remake came along and completely reinvented the idea through the prism of David Cronenberg's body horror that he had been honing since his first film, Shivers, or They Came From Within, audiences were able to get something that was modern, up to date, truly chilling, that people could relate to. Their own bodies revolting against them. And when we saw what was happening with the AIDS epidemic was breaking out, people saw that The Fly might have been a metaphoric commentary on that. But also, I would like to go back to things like John Carpenter's The Thing. The original The Thing is also a 50s film, and then the remake was done in 82. And then if you want to think about one of my my trifecta of remakes, Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I think Invasion of the Body Snatchers, even to this day, it came out in 78, but I think it supplanted the original. Certainly, I like the original The Thing. I like the original The Fly. I like the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But I do think all three remakes are superior movies. And I think all three of those movies, The Thing, The Fly, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the remakes, endure even to this day, even though the last of them, their 20 years were up in 1986, 14 years ago. Now, since then, of course, they've tried to remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Even Christopher Nolan was involved in a remake of that. So they tried to do that as The Invasion. That was the last time it's been remade a couple of times. Abel Ferrara did a version of it. And then, of course, The Thing has had its prequel made, and all the effects were done in CGI, so it doesn't have the resonance. So I think, in a way, I think your point is well taken. I mean, remakes, Total Recall was, I think, remade too soon. And I think one of the problems with our culture right now, with the remake culture, is that the decision to make these movies is not because a filmmaker, an auteur like John Carpenter or like Philip Kaufman or like David Cronenberg. You have to have an auteur have a take on the material, a way to spin it, to make it new. In the case of Carpenter's version of The Thing, he went back and he went to the original story, the John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There, and updated it that way. The technology just didn't exist in the 50s to do it the way Carpenter did, and Rob Bottin's makeup effects, while some hold up better than others, it's still a movie that is compelling and works as well today as it did when it came out in 1982. But I do think the reason behind remakes is really what's most important. You have to have a filmmaker who's passionate about a film to remake it. nowadays Hollywood remakes are born out of strictly commercial concerns. These movies are known by the public, so we can remake them because people know what they are. I think that's a mistake. I think what you end up with is hey, the Total Recall with Colin Farrell's beautifully made, but it's not nearly as fun. You don't have a director like Paul Verhoeven being Paul Verhoeven. You know, in between RoboCop and Basic Instinct, he made Total Recall. And Total Recall, my friends, has a lot of goofiness in it. But you know what? It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And it stands the test of time. Whereas the remake, for all of its earnestness, same thing is true of RoboCop. I mean, I think if you look at those Paul Verhoeven movies, there's a lot of people who don't know those films. If you were to take a group of people that had never seen either movie, either RoboCop or Total Recall, and you sat them down and you made them watch the originals and then the remakes, I'll bet you that they would prefer the remakes more because there's a sensibility working that we've sort of, again, pop culture shifted and changed. Total Recall was 1990, RoboCop was 87, so there was some things that were going on in pop culture then that might not translate to a modern audience today. I mean, Total Recall is 10 years. It's 50% further along than my 20 year. That's my theory, my Robservation of the viability or the lastability of pop culture. But what a great letter! What an interesting topic, and I'll tell you, we can fiercely debate that. I think probably forever. What a topic for film fans to discuss. Brian Eng says, "Hi Rob, how do you handle crying in a movie theater when sitting next to a stranger? Do you do your best not to make a sound and let the tears roll down your cheeks, maybe subtly wiping your eyes, or do you openly sob? Come on, man, I'm a dude. I can't openly sob in movies unless it's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan." No, I mean, look, I guess I'm so programmed not to speak in movie theaters that, like I told people, the most I've ever cried in a movie, just in terms of cry time, like literally tears streaming down my face, was in Amelie. And it happened, like I was saying the other day, when Amelie gives the man the box of his tchotchkes that she's discovered in her bathroom, and then also the watching the video that she makes for the glass man. I mean, I literally, my face was soaking wet, but there was no way. I just keep watching, I just let it happen. If I have to wipe my eyes because my tears are salty, I'll do that. But you don't hear me talk. I can't believe it. I've never done that. Yeah, that's you're not going to get that from me. Only because I'm keenly aware that if I'm crying, I don't want to disturb the emotional experience somebody else would be having, and I wouldn't want them to turn to me and say, if they're crying too, I don't want to interrupt their emotional reaction, because that would be a bummer. Omar94 is here. Omar says, "Hi, Rob. I have more recommendations for you, your moderators and the viewers, for movies I like and I think are underappreciated." So here goes. My first recommendation is a 1940 fantasy adventure called The Thief of Baghdad. By the way, an absolute classic. If you haven't seen it, wonderful. Starring Sabu. Sabu also starred in Black Narcissus, which was brought up a few times a week or so ago. The 1992 Disney Aladdin movie borrowed a lot from this film, such as the villain being called Jafar, and there's a point in the movie when Sabu, who plays Aladdin's sidekick, turns into a monkey, essentially becoming Apu, like in the Disney movie. My second and third recommendations I'm mixed on, since I'm not sure if they're underappreciated, but very few people talk about them. So my second and third recommendations are swashbuckling adventure movies called The Seahawk and Captain Blood. I think they're both classics. Again, it's just they've sort of fallen out of the pop culture memory. Both starring Errol Flynn, Captain Blood also stars Olivia de Havilland, who worked with Flynn on the 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood. Those are my recommendations: The Thief of Baghdad, The Seahawk, and Captain Blood. Thanks, and live long and prosper. All of those, again, Omar, are great suggestions. And I have to say, Omar, I do appreciate your taste in films. I think those are good ones. Stubble McShave is here, our man Stubble. Hi, Rob. This letter can be... Oh, wait. You know what? Hang on a second. I should read these together. I know you. I have 2 letters from you, sir, and they belong... They're 2 great tastes that taste great together. This letter is from Franz Morhart. And Franz, apologies, sir, but I can't read all of this letter in deference to my viewers. Franz says, Gone with the Wind was pulled from HBO Max following racial protests in the U.S. It was just announced. And with that, predominantly white progressive demon rats, descendants of whip, kraken, slave-owning racists, ridden with the black plague of white guilt, sabotage potential sightseers of one of the most seminally bitchin' black performances to ever grace the screen, and to project to everyone you can do better in order to remove evidence of their own racism and thereby win a victory over themselves. Well, I know what you're saying, but here's the thing. I don't think it's ever inappropriate to deal with the thoughts and feelings of other people. And like right now, look, like I've talked about, I lived through the LA riots, which is about the same kind of injustice. There was police brutality. The police were acquitted, and the city went crazy. And 28 years later, the same thing is happening. What has changed? What has changed for the black community? Is the water in Flint, Michigan, is it fixed? Have they cleaned it up yet? No. And I think that everyone is trying to do whatever they can in their own sphere to be more sensitive. And that can only be a good thing. It can only be a good thing. However, we also have to make sure that at the same time you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We can't ever allow ourselves to forget history is very easily erased. And the old adage, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We've seen this time and time again. And I think that how we have to move forward is together. We have to recognize what's come before. We have to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we have to solve these problems. All of this talk, I mean, talking about defunding the police. The police aren't the only issue here. We have huge problems of income inequality, poverty. I mean, poverty would go a long way toward making sure that other issues are alleviated. Poverty and education. Once again, it comes down to things like healthcare, education, and income inequality. These are the base roots of all of these problems, and we can do all we want. We can reform police departments, we can do all these things, but we have to go after the roots of these problems that are even deeper than that. And we don't. We don't. What we need is real reform at the genetic, if you want to think of society as a living creature, the body politic. Well, we need to go to the deep, deep DNA of the body politic and decide that we're going to make a concerted effort to have real reform in our civilization, our entire culture. The police are but one small part of it. There's an entire culture out there that we need to reform from the bottom up. And if we want true revolution, that's what we need to start doing. And I think it's important. I don't think removing, well, hey, if you're HBO Max, you go, how do you want to help? You know, we're a new streaming service. Let's remove problematic portrayals. Well, what are you going to do? Are you then going to get rid of every single problematic portrayal of everything ever in movies? I mean, let's get rid of, now that we know smoking is so bad for you, let's get rid of any movie that has smoking in it, or at least edit those scenes. I mean, when does it end? When does it all end? When do you stop going in and trying to make things palatable? You know, kids riding bikes without helmets on. Oh, got to cut all that out. I mean, that way lies madness. No, we have to be educated and smart enough to recognize, I think, that our civilization was a certain way at one point. We have evolved and we're better now. We've changed. So let's always have these movies stand as a testament to how we've changed. I mean, it's a great thing that we have a record I mean, can you imagine if 500 years ago there was a cinematic or video record of what culture was back in the day? Can you imagine? I mean, it would have been amazing. So we should cherish all of these things, and they should stand as examples of, how not to be. Like, I've often thought that they're going to come after me for my love of Stanley Kubrick's movies. They're going to say, well, Clockwork Orange has problematic depictions of rape and ultraviolence. We can't allow that. And somebody will come and say, I was triggered when I watched this film. This film can't exist. I would say that the message of Clockwork Orange is more important, and it should be able to exist. Does that mean it shouldn't be contextualized? No. Does that mean that anybody who's ever been victimized shouldn't have a say? No. But if we're going to get rid of every problematic depiction that exists, we're going to be left with nothing, because we're inherently problematic. Human beings are infinitely problematic, but we're also infinitely amazing. And what would be called upon would be to use our amazingness to be able to understand and have the intellectual rigor to know about these problems and know about these movies and be able to contextualize them in a way that seems, that makes people understand. And I have no problem with that. When HBO said, okay, yesterday it was getting canceled, and it wasn't until I read that article when it said we're going to bring it back with the kind of proper contextualization. And I would like to see black leaders. I would love to hear someone like Cornel West or John Ridley talk about this film, or Ava DuVernay. I mean, is it? I don't know if it's DuVernay or Duvernay. I'm not sure. I have a crush on her, but I would love to see her speak about this movie, as a filmmaker. Whoopi Goldberg, anybody, contextualize the film and explain what's problematic about it so people can recognize that. They become more astute viewers of media anyway. So I'm glad that it's not going anywhere. So I've got two letters from Stubble McShave here that I'm gonna read together. Then I'll jump over and see what you guys are saying that go together. Stubble says, greetings to the Emperor of Entertainment Evaluation. After watching your Jaws episode of Elizaviews the other day and the two of you talking about the movie, I started thinking. It seems that creators sometimes feel pressured to dive right into the action of their stories at the expense of important character development, because the last thing they want to do is create a boring story. They often overreact by piling on explosions, fight sequences, and high-speed car chases to the point that they're unable to spend important time developing the characters and the character interactions. Character development is especially important in the first half of the story, since viewers need to understand and sympathize with the characters before they're hit with the major plot revelations at the midpoint and at the climax. Summer blockbusters are often particularly guilty of neglecting character development, but in Steven Spielberg's Jaws and Jurassic Park, we have exceptions. Viewing these movies provides important insight into their successes. No one would claim that these films are leisurely character studies, but they rise far above the monster movie genre through an expert use of pacing and loving attention to character, principally in their first halves. It may surprise some viewers to realize the action in both of these movies doesn't heat up until past the halfway mark of these films. Up to that point, we have no real close-ups of the monsters and no extended action scenes. In both movies, Spielberg uses the entire first half of the movie to build suspense and encourage viewer loyalty to the characters. By the time the storm hits and the dinosaurs attack, as well, there are close encounters with the shark. We care in a very sincere way about the characters, and our nerves have been effectively strained to the breaking point through the magnificent use of foreshadowing. Spielberg understood what all creators must, that if you can hook viewers through your characters, you can then take your time building your story to a majestic climax, which I totally agree with, Stubble. And Stubble goes on. This got me thinking, what is the difference between a monster and a dangerous animal? Just to be clear, in this letter, I don't bring up the supernatural monsters. I'm looking at the animalistic monsters. The first thing I considered was the intelligence level. A dangerous animal is driven by its natural instincts, whereas a monster is cunning and malevolent in what they're doing. Although I do think a dangerous animal can be monstrous. There's an intent behind the monster's actions that isn't just driven by only its animalistic nature. An important part of a movie monster, to work as a monster is that we shouldn't feel bad that the protagonists are trying to kill them. This connects to another aspect that's really telling, and that aspect is event versus theme. If you look at the movie The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, there's a very central event where he's severely mauled by a bear. However, I wouldn't call the bear attacking him as the theme of the movie. He was severely injured, and the rest of the movie he tries to survive from those injuries. Therefore, I don't consider the bear in The Revenant as a monster, but rather a dangerous animal. If you contrast that with the shark in Jaws and the carnivorous dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, those animals aren't just events where our protagonist was attacked. Those dinosaurs and the shark were the theme and also the antagonists in the story being told. I therefore consider them monsters. Another example where an animal is the theme of the movie and because of that also must be considered a movie monster is The Ghost in the Darkness. Ooh, that's a nice pull. With Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. It's a historical adventure which centers on a railroad built in Kenya in the late 19th century. The settlement of that railroad build is being attacked by man-eating lions. The attacks by the lions are the central theme of the movie, and the lions cease to just be animals and become monsters to our protagonist. One monster that's a bit troubling for me is the Wampa in Empire. Since it's an event rather than a significant theme of the movie, I'd say it's a dangerous animal. But since it's an animal that I don't recognize as an animal, I want to put it in the monster category. I think that I'd have the same trouble with the Bigfoot or some other animal that's not seen as a traditional animal. So, Rob, do you think that Bigfoot is a monster or a potentially dangerous animal? Or does that merely depend on how it's used in the story? If it's a monster, is it a monster if it's a theme that's running through the story and merely a dangerous animal if they're attacked during an event? Also, can you see a scenario where the xenomorph in Alien would be considered to be just a dangerous animal rather than a monster? Gosh, Stubble, all of those are very good points. Yeah, I mean, look, I think, like, is Frankenstein's monster a monster? I think that Jaws is certainly a monster. The grizzly bear in Grizzly is certainly a monster. The jelly baby mutant monster bear in Prophecy, the monster movie, is certainly a monster. But I do think that, like, when Cujo goes rabid in Cujo, he becomes a monster. But I think, you know, it's interesting. I don't necessarily know. Like, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. But I do think like Ghost in the Darkness, those were monsters. You know, those big cats were monsters. It depends how they're portrayed. But, you know, I would say that, like, in The Empire Strikes Back, for instance, you could say that the Wampa is monstrous, but the Wampa just got to eat. You know, the Wampa is just minding his own business. He didn't ask for the rebel base to be set up on Hoth. He's just doing what he's doing, and he finds Luke there. He's like, I got to eat. Maybe I got to hibernate. And there's some good eating with this young lad. So that's what it's all about. And he's clearly intelligent because he strings Luke up with straps. So he's actually a thinking creature. I wouldn't call him a monster at all, because he's just doing what he does, minding his own business. And how often do you get, I don't know, humanoids walking around in front of, well, your cave? So he was just being himself. And I think a lot of the time it depends. I think it's all about, like your letter, human perception. How do the characters perceive is it a monster? Is it a animal? It's all about how I think it's perceived through the characters. And I think usually in a movie, we as the audience tend to see whatever the monstrous antagonist is, whether it's a wild rabbit animal, whether it's the wolves of the gray, or if it's Godzilla. I mean, it all depends how the protagonists of the movie, I think, view the creatures. But yeah, it's really interesting question. Let's jump over and see what you guys. I mean, that's a good like Comic-Con debate. You know, getting into these kinds of debates when you're at Comic-Con. I love these kinds of things. So yeah, I'm all about that. Let's see. Let me go back here. What people are saying. Let me get down here. So I didn't see these last night. We missed these last night. Dan V says, or 2 nights ago, Matt Reeves did not announce anything when it comes to the Joker in a future movie. It would be surprising if another Joker wasn't cast eventually, but the source is the direct, which isn't that credible. Yeah, for those of you asking, people are asking about there's going to be a Joker in this new trilogy. They don't know yet. They'll have to see if this Batman works. And if it does, maybe we'll see the Joker. Dan V says, I'm also... Oh, thank you, because everyone knows that Claude, our man Claude here, and also Alexander Wilson are both fans of Skyfall. And although they have compelling arguments as to why they like Skyfall, I'm not a fan of Skyfall because I don't like that one of my heroes growing up, my fictional heroes, James Bond, repeatedly fails in Skyfall. And the fact that M dies at the end, it's not even like some... And not only does M die, but one of the most beautiful women to ever appear in a James Bond movie is also dies. So Bond is an abject failure in Skyfall, and I don't like that. So Dan V says, I'm also not a fan of Skyfall because it just bores me where Craig didn't give it his all and Javier Bardem carries the movie. Bardem was essentially the Joker in it, but would be too old now. Yeah, I thought I have that problem. Eric Gant writes in and says, regarding yesterday's episode on Alien and the questions it raises, when it comes to our search for answers, we may find, we might find that having is not so pleasing a thing, after all, as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true. Eric just did something that I love. I love when, we're always, as fans, genre fans, we're always like throwing out lines from things and testing each other. And when you post it on like YouTube or you post something on Facebook and you don't cite the source, in doing that, you're supposed to get, everybody who knows what you're talking about comes in. But there's always some Jablonski who comes in and immediately posts what it's from. I hate that. How does that allow you to prove how smart you are by not only knowing what it is in the first place, but being able to throw other quotes back? I just think it's bad form when somebody comes in and tells you what that is. But since Eric gave it to me and put it in this, and the quote is, once again, he says, when it comes to our search for answers, we may find that, and here's where the quote begins, that having is not so pleasing a thing, after all, as wanting. It is not logical, but it is often true. Man, I think that is one of the great disses of all time. And if you don't recognize it, it's from the opening episode of the second season of the original series of Star Trek. And it's what Spock says to T'Pring, Spock's wife, who totally fucks him up and could have ruined his life without, didn't care. Her own logic for her own happiness could have led to Kirk's demise and Spock losing everything. But in his own Vulcan way, he wasn't going to be like, bitch, please. Really? You're going to try and do that to me? And no. He comes out with that diss. And it's a great diss, and I love it. Just a Brown Girl is here today, who wrote a great letter the other day. Hi, Rob. Today is my birthday. Well, happy birthday to you, Just a Brown Girl. For those in the Post-Geek Singularity who want to celebrate with me by supporting indie films, brown girls, or LGBTQ Pride Month, check out my movie. Here's the link. Okay, I'm going to see if I get this right, if I get the whole thing correct. I'm going to put this, I really want to see Just a Brown Girl's movie, and she won't say, she's sneaky, that Just a Brown Girl. She doesn't say what the movie's title is, unless it's right there. Maybe it's called Just a Brown Girl. I don't know. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm putting that in the, it is here, it is in the, it's in the chat. So there you go, Just a Brown Girl. And happy birthday to you. I hope you have a great birthday. Your next twirl around the sun is your best yet. And may your projects all come to fruition. Damo Davies sends in a tip and says, point of order from your recent Jaws whining about movies. We are conditioned to get the shark when the music kicks in, but when the shark appears when Brody is chumming, we get no music. This is most effective and great. Damo, that is a great point. As everyone knows, in the movie Jaws, when the shark is coming, we hear the shark coming with the music, but one of the great, I think the second biggest scare in the movie is when Brody is chumming the water at the back of the orca and Bruce shows up. and comes out of the water. Elizabeth squealed when it happened. I think that was, I love that. I think it was tremendous. I think it's a great scare. But I think the reason that they played it that way, and I don't think that they're violating their rules, is that it wasn't from the shark's perspective. Like normally when you hear the shark coming, like it's not always from the shark's perspective, but you're under the water. At this point, you're not underwater, you're out there, and I think it still was playing. I think it wasn't playing fast and loose with the audience. I think we absolutely were given. I think it still played. I think it still was there because of the perspective. But that I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Willow Yang, ladies and gentlemen, Willow Yang is here. Can you tell me what self-sealing stem bolts are for? Well, I'll tell you, they're for plot. They're to move the plot forward. But I will say this. I'll tell you what Memory Alpha, Willow, the great Star Trek website that can answer all of your questions. Memory Alpha says, this is what they say about self-sealing stem bolts. Self-sealing stem bolts were, as their name suggested, stem bolts that sealed themselves. The field of application of the self-sealing stem bolt was unclear. Even Miles O'Brien, the chief operations officer on Deep Space Nine, was unaware of their exact use, having spent most of his career not even having seen one. In 2369, Jake Sisko and Nog traded 5,000 wrappages of Cardassian Yarmuk sauce for 100 gross self-sealing stem bolts to a lesbian freighter captain. Jake and Nog opened the communications with the original buyer of the stem bolts under the name the No J Consortium, but eventually settled with a trade of 7 of land on Bajor. So there you go. I guess no one really knows. Maybe in the Star Trek Encyclopedia, which I will have to see, there's a picture of one. I don't know. Lancelot Narayan is here. Hello, Lancelot. I hear Shout Factory are putting out a 4K version of Event Horizon. Yeah. I made all the special features for the DVD release. Ooh, including an hour and 45-minute documentary. I feel like one of the children is being taken from me. Have you ever felt like that? Well, I mean, look at it this way. Yes, I have felt like that. When somebody puts something else out, they released The Usual Suspects on Blu-ray without my documentaries on there, which is annoying. But having just worked with Shout Factory, by the way, you know how I just worked with Shout Factory? Perhaps many of you don't know that a film I produced, The Hills Run Red, is coming out on Blu-ray on Tuesday from Shout Factory or Scream Factory. And director Dave Parker and I created 6.5 hours of new special features for this film. I mean, how many people get the director and the producer to make their own special features? So pick that up, even if you hate the movie. I think the special features will give you an illuminating look at how a movie is actually made. So there you go. But I would say that knowing Shout Factory and Scream Factory as I do, I'm sure as long as they have access to it, that they will put your documentary on that disc, I would imagine. So there is that. So that's cool, right? I want to see that. I remember watching this documentary. I mean, I have Event Horizon. I've owned it on a number of different formats. So, yeah. Lancelot goes on to say, hi again, Rob. I also directed several interviews shot by Adam Biddle. Would that be Adrian Biddle's son? For season 2 of Twin Peaks, which were taken off me and cut by other people. That hurt me big time. Yeah, I don't like that. I still have audio commentaries for Twin Peaks laid back to Digi, which no one has ever heard. I wonder if you could put those up on your, put those up or reach out to David Lynch. He has a really rich social media platform. If you have those, you might contact him directly and ask if he might do introductions for them and put them up online. Why not? Dancing Dog sends in a tip and says, Robert, I'd rather talk about movies, comic books, and all of the things us Post-Geek Singularity folks love. However, I guess I will voice my opinion on this matter. Gone with the Wind is indeed a classic, a marvelous film, and yes, it is problematic. It has been temporarily taken down and will be restored with a disclaimer and the discussion, which is fantastic. To the members here who believe that this is going too far, again, I ask you to listen. Remember, I remember speaking with a black friend once who told me that he loves movies but hated going to the movies. He said he enjoyed the films of Sidney Poitier, but he felt the black exploitation films were foolish and embarrassing. Then in the 70s and 80s, he would look for black people on screen and find he would see maybe a soldier's story or Louis Gossett in a film. Then he would get a series of Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy comedies, Whoopi Goldberg films later, and in the 90s, Spike Lee opened the door, but Hollywood loved hood films mostly. That's true. Rocky had America cheering for a white hero beating up on a black man. Later, he saw Wesley Snipes and Denzel Washington, but he told me people would complain about Tyler Perry films being mostly black, yet how diverse are Scorsese films? All very good points, and something we shouldn't forget. Now, you know, I like seeing, there's been, in recent years, there's been a lot more black relationship films, comedy movies, romances, thrillers, which has been great. And I think that's what we need more of. I mean, look, again, we just need more of everything. You know, we need more of everybody's voices out there making movies. I mean, that's why we need more people of all colors to make films, you know. We need to hear... no one's going to understand these things unless they understand everybody's experience, you know. And I think that's the way that we're going to get to understand one another mostly, is be able to convey through storytelling our experience of the world. And that's why I always say, and I stand by it, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And it's those experiences and what people go through that are going to help us know each other. So the more people we have out there, the more people of all kinds. You know, I mean, it's really interesting. There's a YouTuber, I've talked about her on the show, ContraPoints. She is trans, and I'm dying to hear. I saw something popped up in my feed from her today, and I'm dying to hear what she has to say about the J.K. Rowling situation, who also, by the way, J.K. Rowling put out a very long essay today that I think is worth checking out. Everybody should listen to what she has to say. As well, before screaming bloody murder at her, read her essay, which I thought was quite good. But again, I'm curious. I mean, I'm curious about what trans people would have to say about her essay, because I think that's important. I think that's what's most important, really. Marv Diesel sends in a super chat and says, "As a proud Pittsburgher," is that what Pittsburghers call? If you're from Pittsburgh, do you say you're a proud Pittsburgher? I guess you would. I never thought of that. And let me just tell you, one of my favorite, I think one of Pittsburgh's favorite sons has to be George Romero. I've been to Pittsburgh. I actually really liked Pittsburgh. You know, what is it? It's Three Rivers, right? I had a good time in Pittsburgh. I was there, and I really wanted to go to the Monroeville Mall. I wanted to go, was it last year when they had the 40th anniversary of Dawn of the Dead? I really wanted to go there. But yes, so as a proud Pittsburgher, I would love to see how Mr. Rogers would have handled our nation's current situation. Rob, please, won't you be my neighbor? Well, Marv Diesel, I'll tell you, I would be your neighbor. As a matter of fact, I'd be honored and proud to be your neighbor. I'd have you on the show. We could do it live from somewhere in Pittsburgh. So, yes. Because, yeah, I would like to know, what is it like to be a Pittsburgher? Oh, Dancing Dog has a conclusion. He says his friend told him, he hated films about the supposed good old days. He asked me, who are those days good for? Certainly not African Americans. So if we were to really learn from the past, ask not glorify a fantasy, I again ask the Post-Geek Singularity to listen. Listen, and again, don't be defensive. He told me his dad wasn't even allowed to sit in certain sections of the movie theater when he would go as a kid. It doesn't sound like the good old days to me. Again, listen, folks, that was America, and it was not so great. Okay, now back to Geek TV and movies. How about that Lucian, or Joanna Cameron's legs in that ISIS costume? Oh, Lucan, the wolf boy. Wow, dude, that was Lucian. I'm reading as you're talking about Lucan. Yeah, that's old school, man. Or Joanna Cameron and ISIS. Yeah. Yeah. It's true, but it's true. Like all you have to do is listen. I totally agree. It's funny. I just as an aside, we had a couple 5 years ago. We had our 30th high school reunion, and I remember thinking I had a really good time in high school, and I really did. I had a really really good time in high school. I had a great high school experience, and some of the organizers of the reunion were surprised to discover that there were people that we went to high school with that never wanted to be reminded of it. They never wanted to see anybody from high school again. That's how terrible their high school years were. And I remember thinking, wow, how could I have had such an incredibly different experience from the same people that I was in school with, whatever, 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, whatever it was, including lunch. How could that happen? But it did happen. It did happen. And I was surprised by that. It never occurred to me. And I think that's what everybody has to remember, is that one person's great experience, another person can be suffering a horrific one, and you'd never know. And that's kind of like life in general. You could be walking down the street next to somebody, and you might have just got a promotion, and they might have just been fired. And you just never know. So I do think it's important, and your experience of life, I'm constantly fascinated. You walk down a couple of blocks, you see people's homes, and you're like, I have no idea what's going on in that house. I have no idea what's happened there. Just like they have no idea what's happening in my house. And these are people that live a block away from you. Their experience of the world could be totally different. And that's something that I think we all have to remember. We all have to know that everybody's experience of the world is different. And we do have to listen to it. And that's how we learn. Let's see. Hang on. Mark C. is here. Hello, Mark C. If they remove Gone with the Wind, HBO Max should also remove the Watchmen miniseries for glorifying and inciting racial violence. Don't believe 8 hours of TV can contribute. Remember the uproar over your 2-second tweet? Yes, which I'm still dealing. People are threatening me and threatening my family with bodily harm, horrific bodily harm and violence. So yes, I remember. But look, I would hope that in the context, I think all of these things, Mark, you're touching on something that's true. You can't. Eventually, you're going to come around and find out that many different films are going to be problematic. And the fact is, man, there are assholes everywhere in the world. We can't also pretend that everybody's perfect. Like, all human beings are perfect, and we're not. We've been living in a cosmic charnel house for the last 10,000 years, spinning around this planet, and there's been one thing, the one thing that you can say that human beings have been best at over the years is killing each other, is visiting violence and horror onto one another. We're really good at that. Really good at that. And we can't forget about that. So I would say that all things are problematic, and Watchmen definitely has some things that I think should be looked at and talked about, and I would hate to see that they remove that. Just like I'd hate to see them cancel Clockwork Orange. Yeah. Nay sends in a super chat and says, I'm currently listening to old random Howard Stern shows, and he's interviewing William Shatner and a rapper named Rated R, and he said they're promoting a movie called Free Enterprise. That's true. That has to have been from 21 years ago. Yes, the Rated R, pardon me, was a rapper I work with in Free Enterprise. That's kind of another thing. I'm accused of being a racist, but the end of the one movie I've directed has part of Tupac's posse, Thug Life, performing with William Shatner a rap version of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. I mean, I don't know. It's funny. I didn't even think about that when people started accusing me. I'm being accused of being a racist. Part of what somebody who's now threatening me with violence, and Elizabeth and the family with violence, is the same person who's accusing me of racism. Which I'm like, I don't even know what to say to that. But yeah, check that out. Check that out. Hans Zong. What a cool name, Hans Zong. That sounds like a Bond villain. Hans Zong. Is that like a character, or is that just your name? Because if that's your name, what a cool name to have. Hans Zong. What do you think of Junkie XL scoring Godzilla vs. Kong? Personally, I prefer Bear McCreary to return and reuse the classic Godzilla theme. You know, I loved this. I love the score. Love the score for Godzilla King of the Monsters. But I love Junkie XL, man. I love that score. I love the score for Fury Road. And I did like the score. I'm looking forward to hearing the score for Justice League, the Snyder Cut of Justice League. So, Gerald sends in a tip and says, what do you make of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle? It seems like the Antifa mob is reenacting the plot to The Dark Knight Rises. Will Batman return to save us? Right now, no. The city of Seattle is being embattled by Antifa, who are armed, and they're taking over parts of the city, and they're encouraging violence. What's interesting to me about the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, well, that's traditionally been the gay community. And that's where the Seattle International Film Festival is usually held. And I'm curious, is Antifa partnering up with our LGBTQ brethren to save the world? I don't know. I think what they're doing is incredibly irresponsible, and it is suspect. And I hope no one gets hurt. And my family lives in Seattle, so my mom, my sister's kids. I think this sets a bad precedent. You want to have open armed revolution in American cities. What do you think is going to happen? And of course, they've released their list of demands, which, I mean, give me a break. But okay, how this is, and I'm surprised so far. When I went on this show, none of the major news networks had picked this up yet. But it's pretty insane, especially considering how hard Seattle got hit in the coronavirus epidemic. And yeah, it's really disconcerting. It's really disconcerting, and very worrisome to see this happen in my hometown. Alexander Wilson, but it doesn't surprise me after what I saw happen at Evergreen in 2017. Alexander Wilson sends in a tip and says, 12 Years a Slave got a lot of flack for the gore, violence, and trauma it showed. This was said by What the Flick movie YouTube channel. Also, I saw Gone with the Wind when I was 14, and it was like a bunch of BS that I saw. Yes. I don't understand how anybody could have made the movie 12 Years a Slave without the gore, violence, and trauma. I mean, you have to do that. And that was just a movie. Think about the reality of it, which was probably far, far worse. If anything, they didn't go far enough. So, yeah, it was horrible. And like you said, Alexander, Gone with the Wind is fantasy. It's fantasy, absolutely. Koba is here, our favorite simian. Koba says, Alfred Hitchcock remade his own movie, The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1934 and 1956. See? 20 years apart. 20 years apart. So there you go. David Goldstein sends in a super chat and says, do you have a Henry Cavill Superman hot toy? I have dos Superman hot toys. I have the Justice League version of Henry Cavill, and I have the Man of Steel version of Henry Cavill. The Justice League version has a brighter suit. So yes, I do. I also have Russell Crowe as Zod, and I have Michael Shannon. Did I say Russell Crowe Zod? Russell Crowe as Jor-El, and Michael Shannon as Zod. And then I've got the Justice League hot toy Superman as well. So I have four. Anonymous says, is Shaw killing Han considered racist? I don't think so. I don't think so. I didn't see any racial connotations in that killing. But we'll see, because he didn't really kill him, did he? But I like the question. By the way, justice for Han. Dan V is here and says, if Gone with the Wind didn't return, that would be bad. It does remind me that To Kill a Mockingbird 2 years ago started being banned in even more school districts due to the language with racism. People can't be afraid to talk about issues. Education is paramount in modern times. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian has been banned in schools due to the author's personal life. I find that to be wrong. I also wanted to say that I hope your family stays safe in Seattle. Well, my mom's in Bellevue. I hope everyone's going to be safe. It just depends. I mean, where are you going to go? You're taking over Seattle neighborhoods, armed revolution, armed insurrection, or whatever you want to call it, and you're making demands of the government that can't possibly be met. So what are you going to do? Are you going to start open warfare on our city streets? Is that where are you going to take that? How's that going to work out for you eventually? Damo Davies sends in a tip and says, in your recent discussion with John Campea on his on the show, you referenced the trope where the guy likes the girl and the girl's boyfriend is a jerk. One film where the girl's guy is a nice guy is Superman Returns, where Lois is dating Perry White's son. Damo, that's a very good point, and I was actually thinking about that. I should have brought that up. We were talking about on the John Campea show, in terms of people having being true to one another, that if a character, a hero, falls in love with a woman who's already involved, they tend to make that person's significant other kind of a jerk. So when the hero and the woman eventually do hook up, or the whatever protagonist is, and the protagonist hooks up with the secondary character, it's more palatable. But you're absolutely right. Richard White, Perry White's son in Superman Returns, is a genuinely nice guy, and I think that was part of what I loved about Superman Returns. Is that's a great point. Damo Davies says, unpopular opinion, I love Superman Returns, and I think it's much better than the Man of Rehash. Sorry, Man of Steel. Different people do indeed love different things. I agree. I totally agree. This is interesting. Honest Asian Guy asks, hi, Rob, which do you prefer? The stalker, slasher, semi-rape revenge feel of the Terminator, or the spectacular action and scope of Terminator 2? I personally enjoy the Terminator more, but I'm a bit of a horror guy. Thanks and have a good evening. Well, Honest Asian Guy, I have said often I prefer the first Terminator. I prefer the freshness of it. When I saw it, it was amazing, and I think as a B movie, and it is a B movie, it's a perfect. When I saw that film, it was so enjoyable. I loved movies like that. You know, it didn't have to be an A-list Hollywood production. We got a lot of the film directors at the time that I was loving, whether it was like David Cronenberg or John Carpenter. You know, they didn't have huge Hollywood budgets, and I thought the Terminator was so clever and so well done. I really love the relentless nature of it. But it's not to say Terminator 2 isn't good, but again, you've already seen Terminator, and when I first saw the Terminator, it was so like, oh my God, this movie's incredible. I love it. So, yeah. Mukbang is here and says, congrats on 27,000 subs. That's great, and you continue to thrive even amid current tumult. Just support for you and Liz. Well, thank you, Mukbang. You've always been a great supporter of the channel. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, you know, here's the thing. Things are tough. They're tough all over. You have to keep going. And I'll tell you, there's one thing. I have had so many nice letters. People have reached out to me in DMs. People have been very supportive. I've been very understanding. I've been very understanding about all this. But what's been most interesting is I've heard from all kinds of people from all over. And that has been, I think, the most gratifying of all of it, is that people feel that this is a place that they can come and be heard and be listened to. I mean, look, there's a lot of people that have come after me, and I would imagine I'm dealing with a situation which is escalating to the point where I'm going to have to bring in law enforcement. And first of all, there's something I'm glad that we have a police force for. That has nothing to do. I mean, I'm there, and you have to take, when people start threatening you and threatening your girlfriend with horrible, awful sexual violence, you have to take that under consideration. But despite the one bad apple or few bad apples of the bunch, it has been incredibly supportive. People have been incredibly supportive of all of this, and it's been great. Because look, man, proof's in the pudding. You know, I mean, I've been here. This is episode number 438. And episode 438, I think what I'm all about on this channel is pretty apparent. So you can look and see what you think, and if I'm full of shit or not. And if I am full of shit, please call me on it. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, "I think Pleasantville is hugely underrated. I love Pleasantville. I thought it was really clever, really interesting, and I think it's what a great fantasy film. You know, people don't talk about it that much. I don't have Pleasantville on Blu-ray. I have it on. I have a DVD of it, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. I never upgraded. I should do that. Is it on Blu-ray? I gotta find out." Watcher1 sends in a super chat and says, "Do you have any idea why the DC streaming service is not incorporated into HBO Max? I thought subscribing would get me the Harley Quinn animated show." Watcher1, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know why. I think the launch of HBO Max has been a little haphazard, to be honest. I don't know why. And some people I used to work with, their show DC Daily got canceled yesterday, which is a bummer for them, and I hope they all find cool jobs. But that, I don't know. I would have thought it would have just been folded over. I have no idea. Dave Crabtree sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity, here's a fun throwback. A 1984 sci-fi comedy classic, The Ice Pirates." Ice Pirates is pretty funny. I used to own that on VHS. Played on HBO and cable repeatedly in the 80s, and much of the humor went over my head as a youngster. Has a great cast and space herpes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. David sends in a tip and says, "I was watching Breakfast at Tiffany's, and I wonder if there should be some sort of disclaimer ahead of it due to the Mickey Rooney caricature depiction of Asian men." I would think so. It's good. I don't see as any why. We have a disclaimer for violence. We rate things TVMA. I have absolutely no problem giving people warnings. Like, we're all adults. If we can say, why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we? So Lore, that reminds me. Lore sends in a tip and says, "Warner Brothers removing Gone with the Wind caused people to run and buy the physical versions. It's shot to #1 on Amazon. I'm fascinated by this. Rob, what do you think the psychology behind it is? It's like people thought they'll never be able to see the movie again." Okay, this is interesting. It's funny that you mentioned that, because you just reminded me that I did, in fact, queue up another article to read on this show, and I would like to read it now. Hang on, I totally forgot about this, and let's read about it. Gone with the Wind shoots to #1 on Amazon's bestseller list, sells out after being pulled by HBO Max. While HBO Max pulled Gone with the Wind temporarily from its streaming service offering on Tuesday, Amazon has reaped the rewards of the controversy that ensued. The 1939 classic shot to the top of Amazon's movies and TV bestseller list overnight, and on Wednesday occupied the #1 slot, the #8 slot, and the #9 slot. And it did so in different iterations: DVD, Blu-ray, and the 70th anniversary edition. I believe that's the edition I have. It's in a big. I have the Blu-ray box of Gone with the Wind. I have is in a big furry, like velvety furry box. With the exception of what seemed to be single copies being offered and immediately snapped up on the site, Victor Fleming's Civil War era film is sold out in every format. One Blu-ray copy was being offered for $334.01. On one hand, the frenzy is not surprising, given the film's enduring popularity and status as the highest-grossing movie of all time when box office numbers are adjusted for inflation. But on the other hand, the run on copies is surprising, given that HBO Max said it will restore the film to its service as originally created, but with a discussion of historical content. Notably, Gone with the Wind is still available to rent or own via Amazon's digital Prime video service. And, of course, I had read this already, but I don't need to read the rest of the thing. But since you talked about it, yes. I loved that. I mean, I loved that people had a run on it. Look, the psychology behind it is people's knee-jerk reactions is, I'm not going to be able to see this ever again. I'm not going to be able to see it again. What am I going to do? And so I have to go out and get it. I think at any one time, I mean, that could very well be the case. And anything that bolsters the sale of physical media. But I think from a psychological point of view, Gone with the Wind is a beloved movie. And I think a lot of people, when they watch the film, the film does focus on the relationship between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler, and the problematic elements of it are usually things that are not, I think, thought of. I mean, it's their relationship that's the core of the movie. It deals with, like, look, when I watch Casablanca, a movie that's set in World War II, and there's Nazis in it, I don't think to myself that this movie is. They're not dealing with the Holocaust. They're not dealing with 6 million Jews in Germany were taxed out of existence, and then after they fought against everything the state was doing to them unofficially, there was Kristallnacht, and then people just showed up at their doors and said, these are no longer your homes anymore. You have to, and then they were shipped off, and 6 million Jews were exterminated. As somebody who was raised in the Jewish faith, I don't watch Casablanca I don't watch Raiders of the Lost Ark and think to myself, the portrayal of the Nazis in this movie is problematic to me because of what they did to the Jews. I don't think when Indiana Jones says Nazis, I hate those guys, that it's at all problematic to me as a Jew, or when they basically turn a giant set piece into a joke when Indiana Jones has Hitler sign his diary, the Grail diary. I don't. I understand what is being, just because something, it's just such a weird, look, I love movies that have Nazi villains in them. I love watching Nazis get their asses kicked. I do. I do. And I love World War II movies where the Nazis lose. However, I can watch a movie like Das Boot and I can feel the horrors of war. I mean, these dudes who are doing their job, I mean, should I not be able to watch Das Boot because, it glorifies a German sub crew even though it's about the horrors of war? No. I mean, I understand what's going on here. And again, people could say to me, well, Rob, the Nazis did kill 6 million people, 6 million Jews and 6 million other people. How could you you should never be having them played for laughs. But maybe that's true. But in the long run, I want to see Nazi ass get kicked. And maybe that's problematic. Maybe it's not. But at the end of the day, like I said, throughout human history, we do not have a great track record of treating people well in this country or in any country. Human beings are terrible people. We're terrible. I mean, we're wondrous, but we're terrible. And this idea that every example in popular culture of how we've been terrible to one another, I mean, think about it. As I said, slavery didn't just go on for 1 year or 10 years or 20 years or 50 years. It went on for centuries. No amount of money will ever be able to absolve what was done. And it's one of the people that I worked with, at Collider came after me, and the idea that I was advocating just shooting any looter, which was completely ludicrous and isn't what I was saying. I was speaking about one specific instance. Somebody came after me and said, well, how do you feel about America looting Africa? And I thought to myself, one, I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I understand what she was driving at, but I'm like, why? First of all, why would you ask me that? And second of all, I mean, the history is not so easy and cut and dried. And I just I didn't understand that. But, those kinds of things have now contributed to the fact that, do I have to worry about my personal safety? Do I have to make sure, I mean, we have been threatened with bodily harm. Do I have to go buy a gun? I don't want to. But, I mean, these are important issues to discuss rationally and thoughtfully, because it doesn't help when everybody's, talking that way. But anyway, now here's a question. Lancelot Narayan says, Harmy or 4K77? Stay strong, brother. What Lancelot is referring to, I own I own 2 different versions of Star Wars in 4K. I've got the 4K77 version, and I have Harmy's despecialized version. And I have to say, The 4K 77 version makes it look more filmic. And to be honest, I think I might prefer Harmy's version. But don't come after me. Because with my equipment and the things that I watch movies on, I might give the edge to Harmy. However, I like the fact that I have them both. So I can compare and contrast. But that's a very good question. Stay strong, brother. I will. Dangerous Lee says, the most satisfying film ending ever, Once Upon a Time in the West. Talk about a build-up so effing good. Thanks, Rob. Well, I don't want to ruin that ending, but that is a great ending. Once Upon a Time, if you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in the West, it's pretty damn good. It's essential. You have to see it. It's one of the great Westerns ever made. The ACU sends in a super chat and says, you're not a bad guy, but I still hate you because I'm just jealous of your bookshelf. It's way more cooler stuff than mine. Stay safe and live long and prosper. Well, ACU, you know what's great about bookshelves like this is you can just keep adding to them. Just keep adding to them. And, yeah, and I think that's always a good thing to do. Keep adding to them. Black Bono Lala sends in a super chat and says, I just want to say you, Rob, are awesome. Well, Black Bono Lala, you're awesome too. Thanks. Thank you for writing in. I appreciate that. Emil Johansson, our man Emil, all the way from Sweden as well. Is it weird that my German neighbor likes Das Boot? I just talked about that. I love Das Boot. I see Das Boot as an anti-war film, but I mean, it's like, I think seeing a film about the perspective of the German perspective of the war can only be a helpful thing. I do. I keep getting warnings that my frame rate is too high. We shall see. All right, I got more letters, people. I've got more letters, and I just have to get to them because I've been... let's see. Chuck Philpott sends in a super chat and says, just looked on eBay, Gone with the Wind DVDs are going from $35 to $100. Just want to say hi, Rob, and have a good day. Well, hello, Chuck Philpott. Well, thank you for that. I very much appreciate that. Now I'm just bummed out. I don't know what a self-sealing stem bolt, what it is. So, yeah, I apologize to Willow for that. So, yeah, I feel guilty about not knowing an answer to something. Let's see. Here's another one. Here's a letter that Ian Samuels sent in today. This is an Ian Samuels letter from today. I think this is a pretty good letter. Rob and fellow Robservationists, new and original ideas are difficult to come by these days. Most of what writers and filmmakers come up with, especially with sci-fi and fantasy, we've seen before. Most are happy to admit where their influences come from. Some, like J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, for some time kept insisting that all of her ideas were her own and new. That was until interviewers started picking apart her new ideas. Hogwarts, a plant. She then fumbled and claimed that perhaps she had seen the name while visiting Kew Gardens. Dumbledore, an old English name for a bumblebee. Butterbeer, a drink that has been around since the 16th century. Another issue, particularly with sci-fi, is forms of transport. Star Trek's warp drive, Star Wars hyperdrive, Battlestar Galactica's FTL drive, Dune's folding space. Writer Douglas Adams tried to get around this problem with the invention of the infinite improbability drive in his sci-fi masterpiece, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Dune's folding space and infinite improbability drive, which even appears in the engineering of the Enterprise D, according to the technical manual, are perhaps the only truly new and imaginative forms of space travel in sci-fi. Even Babylon 5, despite the jump gate technology being a new idea, it was still based on traveling in hyperspace. But I think I may have another. I'm interested in your opinion. The thought drive, traveling at the speed of thought. A powerful telepath, one that has traveled the galaxy, that has the ability to hold a ship and its crew in his or her mind. and project it into orbit around another planet that they visited. The telepath has their own special chamber on board their ship, isolated from distractions. They form an image in their mind of the ship in orbit around the planet. They then form in their mind an image of the ship in orbit around the destination planet, and the ship and its crew simply vanish from one point and reappear at their destination. Do you think this is a workable idea in sci-fi? No. Because I'll tell you why. The thought, I think that's too much of an ask. That even with, I think folding space is rough too, but the thought drive, you're like, okay, well, how does that mechanism work? I mean, when you're moving mass across great distances, there are still physics that you're sort of bound to. And I think this unless you're omnipotent like the Q, or the Traveler or something like that, then maybe, but I don't think a telepath, because you don't just need the mental capacity to use telepathy. You also have to be able to actually move the whole thing. So that to me seems a little too powerful. But then again, I could be wrong. Although, you know what? Now I'm going to think about that all day long. I'm going to be like, is it too powerful? I don't know. Did I say the right thing? I could have got something wrong about that. I mean, who knows? I hope I didn't get something wrong about that, but you never know. Here's a article, a letter from Klimt. I love this. Gustav Klimt on the box. Klimt Eastwood. Dear Rob, I listened to your comment on the Washington Post article on cop shows. I'm afraid you missed the point. The article doesn't call for cop shows to be canceled. You suggest the article calls for cop shows to be canceled, but this is incorrect. The article says, suspend the shows to revise the storyline so that they're more realistic. Yes, the article does say, halt the shows to revise the storylines. But it doesn't say cancel. In fact, immediately after, in the same sentence, it clarifies that the shows should be suspended in order to revise the storylines to make them more realistic. Immediately halt production on cop shows and movies and rethink the stories it tells about policing. There's no drama in cop shows without cops being good. You say there's less drama in a conviction rate of 33%, but certainly not from the victim's point of view. In their attempts to seek justice, in a way they are frustrated by inefficiency or corruption or racism or just plain disinterest. There's plenty of heartache too. Far too much of the baser side of humanity, and the police and justice system as institutions are part of that. It's just completely different kind of drama where the roles of the good and the bad are different and more realistic. This is what I understood the article calling for. I would say, okay, I don't disagree with you, but also we are making drama here. And then you're going to start, like, if you're now going to say that cop shows have to be absolutely more realistic to most of a police job, I mean, you find out that, like, most of police work is not drudgery necessarily, but it's very methodical, and it's not what we see on TV, sure, but in an hour-long drama, Alfred Hitchcock said life or drama is life with all the dull bits cut out. And do we want to watch, like, cops writing reports for an hour? And I think, like, I remember a friend of mine's a Submariner, and he was talking about how Crimson Tide was very unrealistic. Like, what happened in Crimson Tide was very unrealistic. And that deals with the release of nuclear weapons. And it's like, okay, but within the context of that story and the Denzel pitted against Gene Hackman, and are we obligated then in all of our fiction to make it exactly, precisely realistic? And if we're going to do that, who's going to be the arbiter of that? Are we going to now have to hire, like, a group of technical advisors, like 20 cops, to sit down there and say, hey, you need to adhere to exactly what happened. Look, is a movie like Training Day suddenly going to be deemed racist because the portrayal that Denzel Washington makes in an Oscar-winning role? I mean, because he's a cop gone very, very bad? I mean, this is my problem with all of this. It's like, we have to make sure that everything makes everybody feel good all the time. I'm like, I don't fucking care. Like we can't live in this society. We live in a pluralistic society where everybody has different points of view. And at the end of the day, the great thing about entertainment is you don't have to watch it. But then people would say that, well, what about the people that do watch it? I'm saying that what we really need to concentrate on is not whether entertainment is more realistic, because what does that mean? Does that mean we have to get rid of comic books? But I would say this: what we need, we have to solve. Let's make people smarter. Let's make people smarter so they can be more discerning. And if they don't like things, if viewers don't like the way these shows are going, I mean, it just seems. Let me go on with you. Let me read more about let me read more of your letter. And when you say there's no drama in cop shows without cops being good, look at The Wire, look at Training Day, look at Internal Affairs. I love, not Infernal Affairs, but Internal Affairs, the Richard Gere, Andy Garcia movie. What's really interesting about that is those are movies that have bad cops. Both Training Day and Internal Affairs, they make a great double feature. If you haven't seen Internal Affairs that stars Andy Garcia and Richard Gere plays a bad cop, it's great. It's great. So when I think about those movies, it's like you have two really bad portrayals of cops, and they kind of were derived from the L.A. Rampart scandal, all that stuff that went on there. But I'm like, what does that mean? Is Training Day now going to be considered racist? Or should we get rid of it because it might not be? I mean, even that, the portrayal of racist cops and the portrayal of bad cops. Look at The Wire. All of these things. And then you go on. Your next point is, cops show the baser side of humanity, and there's much to learn from that. This is true in principle, and I don't think there should be a ban on cops being shown doing good or dictate that they should always be shown being bad. That'd be unrealistic, and it's to be an issue of censorship, free speech, and artistic freedom, no doubt. However, this isn't what cop shows are doing. They're not Chekhov or Conrad or Kubrick. Rather, the pattern of what they show viewers focuses on a very specific part of the baser side of humanity. Non-cops who are horrible people doing horrible things to good people, and then good cops to the rescue. Are there such horrible non-cop people? Sure. Are there good cops? Of course. There are in all walks of life. But what do we learn from these shows? We learn that cops are good, and they nearly always get their guy. Plus, good civilians trust the police, and those who mistrust the police are either bad or just misunderstood the cops in question. Not only is that factually wrong, the sad reality is that for white audiences, these shows reinforce their view of the police and as such make police reform harder. Cop shows portray police as institutionally good with a few bad apples. Cops, in reality, sadly, are an institutionally racist and authoritarian organization with a few good apples. Now, here's the thing. That is something that I cannot agree with you on. And the statistics don't support that either. You can't say there are many people, many men and women in all areas of law enforcement that have gotten into law enforcement with the idea to be good. And this idea, we can't just say all of a sudden that I don't want to live in a society where there are no more police. I don't, because I don't trust the rest of humanity. Humanity needs some kind of policing. And this idea, cops in reality, sadly, are an institutionally racist and authoritarian organization with a few good apples and a lot of indifferent ones. Okay, when you say something like that, that is as stereotypical and blanket as anything else anybody could say. And I think that, remember, the police are required to render aid of all kinds to all different kinds of people. Domestic violence, child abuse cases. Who's going to help for those things if there's no more police left? I can't go with you on this, and I just can't. We've got armed Antifa mobs in Seattle that are taking over neighborhoods and setting up barricades and advocating open revolution with guns on the streets of an American city. What to do? But let me go on. Let me go on and read what you have to say. But remember the saying from which the apple expression is taken: a few bad apples spoil the barrel. If only that weren't so about the police, but alas it is. Also consider that for non-white communities with radically different experiences of the police and justice systems, each storyline are not just factually incorrect, they are a slap in the face every single show. In both ways, these shows are part of the problem. In both ways, these shows are not simply entertainment or even art. They also have a directly political effect, and this is why the author is right. Think of it this way, with an intentionally provocative analogy. Were there a few good members of the Nazi Party which didn't agree with its ideology and tried to do something good? Sure. Really? I mean, okay, the Nazi Party was set up to do a specific thing. They stated what they wanted to do. You know, they wanted to establish the fatherland, and their methodology going about it was very clearly stated, and they acted on that. They did that. So again, I can't go with you. Look, I even watched Inside the Third Reich. I think it was Inside the Third Reich that talked about. It was Rutger Hauer. It's a miniseries about Albert Speer, who's an architect, and he was a dude that was part of the. I don't know if he was an actual party member, but he was an architect, and that's what he wanted to do, was make things, was build the fatherland. And he got caught up, and he was as far as I know, he was a Nazi. And all he wanted to do was build buildings. Did he want to exterminate people? Probably not. But the Nazi Party, to even equate our police force with the Nazi Party, which was a political ideology, and they were invading countries and killing people, not just through extermination camps, but they were attacking their neighbors. They literally lied and went against treaties that they had made. So I don't think that it's a great analogy there. But would we be happy with a TV series, let alone an entire genre, which focused massively disproportionately on those few? A far less provocative historical analogy, how do you think a Congolese audience would feel about a historical drama set at the time of Belgium's imperial massacres there, but focused on the good Belgians? Or say, what if Roots had focused nearly exclusively on positive representations of slave owners? Well, again, I can't go with you with these analogies. I can't at all. I mean, the fact is, law and order is something that all civilizations have needed. And what we need education, and we need systemic reform at the basis levels. We need communities that are economically viable. And look, this is way out of my pay grade to talk about, really. I mean, I can talk about entertainment. I just think that deciding that we're going to eliminate an entire genre of entertainment because it is problematic. I mean, I think that, look, I wouldn't want The Wire to go anywhere. The Wire is one of the most insightful TV shows ever made about what the urban life in America is like. And to sit there, somebody would say, well, it's about cops. We have to get rid of all cops. I think we can't think that way. I think that way lies madness. And, I think that these analogies are unfair to make, because our law enforcement is, remember, our media also, like, again, I don't know, I'm not an expert on our penal system, I'm not an expert on law enforcement, I'm not, but I would be curious to see actual statistics about these things, and I think that's important. But I want to say, I appreciate you writing, and while I disagree with a lot you said, I think some of it is interesting, and we've got to take these things under advisement. This one comes from Josh Crichton. Josh Crichton writes a letter and says, to the dangerous disco gunslinger of Discord, the present worshiper to the religion of geekdom in the church, so-called Saint Sweaty, and the collector of nerd comic newsprint, who wears it as his underwear. It's Robert, the Energizer nerd of wonder, Burnett. I can't even wrap my head around that. So I thought these are people that you should write to, who I recommend you interview for the Burnettwork. Let's see. Jennifer Garner, James Gunn, Brian Stevenson, Lita Ford, Katie Sackhoff, Aaron Cummings, John Campia, Scott Ian of Anthrax, David Elfson of Megadeth, Stephen King, Brian Herbert, Jim Brewer, Billy Sheehan, Eddie Trunk, Lizzie Hale, Brian Rose of London Real, Rob Zombie, Dave Rubens, Alex Cooper, and one Del Bigtree. And just as an honorable mention, you can interview me if you want. Some of those are really good suggestions. I definitely will will take that under advisement. Those are definitely people I should interview. Here's another one. Darren Seeley says, in regards to that op-ed Ivy Alyssa Rosenberg in the Washington Post regarding getting rid of cop shows, I'll agree that in some scripted shows, crime does seem to be more on the rise than it is in reality. I always wanted to visit New York City, for example, but if I believe half the stuff on TV where there's a murder of the week or rape of the week, I don't think anyone would want to live there, much less be a tourist. But the op-ed is working on the premise that the entire police departments across the country are corrupt because of the horrible actions of the few. That's utter nonsense. I don't think we should defund the police because that would affect the hardworking, decent police officers who do solve crimes and protect the public. If we defunded the police, that could mean less police officers, including officers of color. That would mean less resources to conduct investigations. It would hurt communities more than help them. I agree action must be taken, and action is taken, and there are those who can and will march in protest peacefully. We can all find common ground and work together. Two wrongs don't make a right. While the left is equating good police officers with bad ones, the right is equating rioters and thieves with those who are protesting peacefully. That may not entirely be the case, but that's how it comes across. It's bad enough. Now we have to go after fictitious officers on scripted TV shows and films. Here's the thought. Shortly after 9/11, there were TV shows on the air that had to reflect the current events of the time, especially cops and first responder shows. There was also The West Wing, who turned out the best episode of that series, in my opinion, Isaac and Ishmael. It's great hour TV. The point I'm making here is that with all the scripted cop shows out there, be it in Law & Order, SVU, Chicago PD, and SWAT, to name a few, is there any doubt that as soon as production starts back up that they will address current issues? I would be surprised if they didn't, especially Chicago PD. I love the show, but there's a character there, the lead character of Hank Voight, played by Jason Beggy, is aggressive in his pursuit of criminals, to put it mildly. The character has a history of butting heads with internal affairs, has been called out for some of his methods. He'll protect family members or other cops in his unit when they mess up. The suspects and or criminals the unit tends to face are dangerous and do not hesitate to kill or destroy. Voight's unit thus meets force with force when necessary. Is it plausible, then, that in the next season there may be a storyline or element that will address current issues? It's a given COVID-19 will already play at least a small part, but the recent tragedies and the aftermath most likely will not be ignored either. Also, in the past and present, cop-themed shows have dealt with corruption in their own blue wall. There are also occasional social issues that are dramatized in these shows as well from time to time. A lot of people like Blue Bloods, which is about a generation of cops. It's my mother's favorite show. Why does she like it, I ask her. She says, every episode, the family sits down for dinner. People are going to miss that, I guess. I wonder if anyone will miss the Murder Channel, or ID Discovery. True crime reenactments, sometimes sensationalized in tabloid flavor. It has an audience. Forensic Files and Homicide Hunter can be fascinating, but most of the programming gets me depressed simply because it depicts the real-life evils some people do. Watch a little bit of that if you can. You wouldn't dream of defunding the police after that. That said, there's one ID Dateline report who had a pair of criminals so cold and inhumane by the end that when the story concluded with the murderers getting the death penalty, I had a feeling that, yes, I wanted to pull the switch myself, as I feel empathy with those families who were hurt from the senseless violence. Should shows, news stories, and crime and survivors be pulled from the airwaves if they make you feel this way? They depict most law officers in a favorable light, after all. After reading the op-ed and listening to the show, I started to think of films. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the thought of cop-themed films being a thing of the past, or cop films from the past being cast aside. I started thinking about the best Chuck Norris film, Code of Silence. Oh man, I could see that 1986 film being remade today, and I'm surprised Hollywood isn't on that yet. Maybe they'll get around to it. The B story in that film, of course, revolves around police corruption and the Code of Silence and how it affects and even interferes with investigation. Maybe another letter will go into deeper analysis. I'm not getting rid of my physical media copy of Hard Boiled. I still love the Lethal Weapon films, Seven, Copycat, Die Hard, Heat, Training Day, Tombstone, the list goes on. Yes, Tombstone, Wyatt Earp was a famous lawman, was he not? Take care, Darren J. Seeley. Well, Darren, I mean, that's the slippery slope. I mean, on one hand, these are both interesting. Again, I want to thank you both for writing in these articles because these interesting counterpoints are what the show is all about. The fact that we are here to discuss. And while I might not always agree with everybody, I read both letters. I throw that out to you guys. What do you think? What do you think about that? This is an interesting debate. Do we want our entertainment to be limited? My problem with it also is who's going to do the limiting. You know, we've already come out of we had the Hays Code. We've had so many things that we could show and couldn't show limited throughout the last 100 years of history. Are we now going to go back to censorship? I find that look, freedom of speech is one of the basic tenets of our culture. But you know, our entertainment is are we going to uphold it to a higher standard than we uphold our politicians? I mean, I would say that you're worried about cop shows when you have our president tweeting conspiracy theories about a 75-year-old man getting knocked over by the police. Look, these are tough issues. I don't have the answers. I don't know. It's out of my realm of discussion. I will talk. I think our entertainment should be allowed to be our entertainment, and we should recognize it for what it is. And if people want to challenge that narrative, they can make their own entertainments as well. And I think that there's been just as many, especially lately. Look at a show like The Shield. We talked about that. It was talked about in that article. It's certainly not a show that anybody is going to say. It's just, I don't know. It's just a tough question. It's a tough question, and I hope it's discussed. I hope it is, because if anybody gets my list of what I've ordered from Amazon over the last, 20 years, and they come for me, I'm probably going to be in big trouble. So anyway, Murray Reich is here. Murray Reich says, have you ever seen the Amazon series Hunters? I actually liked it a lot. You should check it out. I did watch Hunters. It was a hoot. And again, problematic from a reality standpoint, but I certainly liked it. Nazis in America getting defeated by Al Pacino and his band of agents. I liked it. I liked it a lot. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of this episode of Robservations. I will be back here at 7 o'clock tonight, where Elizabeth and I, for Elizabeth's Whining About the Movies, are going to discuss another problematic piece of entertainment, Fight Club, David Fincher's Fight Club, and I hope that all of you join us for that. Whining About the Movies, episode 38, Fight Club. Crazy. So we'll see you at 7 o'clock tonight. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to thank the Richard for being a moderator today. I want to thank Mike Bodden and Jim Boyers. Our moderator, Louis Yu, had to step down from being a moderator because of family. Big family change for him, and I understand that. We will miss him, and we'll see about where the moderator status is going to be. But I want to thank them for all the work they do. Also, I want to thank the Richard for administering the Post-Geek Singularity and the Whining About Movies Facebook pages. Go check those out. And also, you can go interact there, which is great. And the website, obviously, send me letters to the website at theburnettwork.net. And yes, and so I bring an end. Oh, wait, Mukbang sends in a super chat and says, I won't be censored even by your amazing live chat. You talk policing and politics today. We get deleted for doing the same. Fix it. If you talk a topic we should be able to discuss. Thanks. Oh, I didn't know that. I will look into that. Come on, Richard. As long as it's on point. But yes, look, this is not a political show, and when I say politics, I mean dealing with politics of the day. Now that I mean Antifa's taking over neighborhoods in Seattle. But this is not necessarily the show to talk about those things on. And, I mean, when we have more movie news about things happening, then I will do that. It'll be, I want to get back to doing nothing but talking about movie news and entertainment news because, it's getting, what more do we want? What more do we want this year? And it's crazy. But I want to thank all of you for being here and thank you for the generous contributions to the channel. And I especially want to thank everybody who writes in for sharing of your thoughts and sharing of yourselves, because how fascinating. I'm so glad we have this community. And aside from our own few bad apples, people who are coming at me in a really disgusting and abhorrent way, and law enforcement's helping me out there. So we shall see. Anyway, I'll be back, and we'll be back at 7 tonight, but I'll be back tomorrow. I'm not on the John Campea show tomorrow. It's Thursday. I will be back with Robservations tomorrow. And now that said, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And remember, all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everybody, more than ever, have a better day. And if there's something you can do to make someone else have a better day, you should do it.